Hi everyone, welcome to eNow's webinar, Configuring and Managing Multi-Factor Authentication for Exchange and Skype for Business. We're going to have a word with eNow's CTO, Paul Robichaud. Paul, take it away.
Thanks, Tracy, and welcome everyone. As Tracy said, I'm Paul Robichaud. I'm the CTO for eNow. We make Office 365 and Exchange, Skype, SharePoint, Active Directory, monitoring, and reporting tools. So I'm going to have a lot more to say about that a little bit later on. First, I have to keep the cat from typing on my keyboard while I'm presenting. That's always a challenge. And then I want to very briefly give a very quick introduction about the topic of today's webinar. One of the things we find as we go out and work with customers and talk to people who are deploying Office 365 or who are interested in it is that Microsoft has done some things that really sweeten the pot to get people to deploy sooner. One of the biggest things that they've done stems from their purchase several years ago of a small company almost no one had heard of called PhoneFactor. It allowed you to add multi-factor authentication to OA. Well, Microsoft has expanded on that hugely to add more authentication types and more places where you can use multi-factor authentication. So our speaker today, my friend Bhargav, is going to spend some time talking about what you can and can't do with multi-factor in Office 365, and more importantly, how you can do what you can. So as not to steal any more of his thunder, I'm going to pass the baton to him. Bhargav, welcome.
What I wanted to do is talk about mostly focusing on on-premises Exchange and Skype for Business. If you want to have multi-factor authentication for your deployments, how can you achieve that with what Azure has provided you with the multi-factor authentication? Because usually when you think of multi-factor authentications, people think of RSA and integrating those into Exchange and Skype for Business. If anybody has tried, you know how difficult that is. And of course, not being Microsoft products, it is difficult to have Microsoft support those solutions too. If you are in a hybrid environment, or if you have Azure AD and Azure AD Premium licensing either as a part of EA or you're evaluating, you start looking at all the options, and one of them, of course, is MFA, multi-factor authentication. And then obviously the next question is, hey Microsoft, it's your own product. Do you support integrating that with your own products on-prem, right? So let's see what Microsoft has to offer there. I'm just going to go over the Mailscape that Paul will talk about later. We'll look at types of authentication, how Active Directory Federation services play a role into the whole mix if you're going to deploy MFA with your Exchange and Skype for Business on-prem. And I have a quick demo as well where I will show you how it actually works. So we'll go over that. And of course, I'll have Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type it in as we're going through the presentation. I will take the questions at the end, and we'll address them all towards the end. It'll make it easier for us to handle it that way. So what is multi-factor authentication? It basically comes down to the standard security of username and password. When you have the standard username and password, the biggest issue with that is how often do you change the password? How complex do you make it? How do you manage it for the users who are mostly remote, may or may not be using your password security because you can't extend the GPOs into those remote workstations that the user brings, especially in the days of bring your own devices, where remote users rarely come to office. But yes, so beyond that username and password, the next question is, how do you make your environments more secure? How do you make your platforms more secure? And the multi-factor authentication allows you to add additional factors, which is what you know is obvious, the username and password. That's the basic that will let you in to a certain extent. If you have the MFA implemented, that basically is the idea where you have something else that isn't easily accessible by others, right? It's not something that somebody can just easily compromise as they can with the the username and password. Most commonly, you have seen RSA, Secure ID, or some other form of tokens that changes the numbers every minute or so. That's I can't call it a random number, but it's the number generator that has some logic that is known to the software and its counterpart. And as the token generates those numbers, every time you log in, you will have to use that token. You have to type it in after you type in your username and password. And that's one form of that multi-factor authentication. Smart card is another one. You have your smart card, you have a chip, you have to type it in, even possibly type in a PIN. That's something that you know that you have, right? You have that smart card, and then you have to enter the PIN, so it authenticates you with the information stored on the smart card. And with Azure, the case is you have option of PIN, you have option of using your smartphone, where you can install the MFA app. You can use that app to approve the request of the logins that you're actually performing on any platform. Or you also have an option to send a phone call to the phone if you don't have the app on that phone. So depending on how it's set up, as the user logs in, the Azure MFA performs the phone call authentication. You receive the phone call, you accept it, and once you do, it reports back to the portal that the authentication was successful, and the process continues. And then in some places you see the other options like biometrics and fingerprint. That's not part of the Azure MFA. I just have it listed there as some formats and some multi-factor options that you see. That's not something that is provided by Azure MFA, by the way, the biometrics and the fingerprint. So what is Azure MFA? Azure MFA is the service that's provided by Azure Active Directory offering. If you have an Office 365 subscription, you can easily just use that by enabling it for your users in the cloud. But I just have it divided into two parts here. One is for the applications in cloud, software as a service offerings such as Office 365. And then you can have any other applications that integrate with Azure Active Directory, that integrates with the identity management framework, where things like Salesforce and Dropbox that already uses your Azure Active Directory, if you set it up, those can leverage MFA. And then the on-premise, which is what we want to talk about today, is the Exchange Skype for Business on-prem. You can also leverage SharePoint VPN and other apps that can use the Azure SDK to plug into Azure MFA. And so it's not limited to the cloud and the software as a service applications only. It's also extendable, and you can use it on-premises. The screenshot here is what we will see when I go through the demo. That's the app you can download whether you have a Windows phone or Android or iPhone. You can download the Azure app that allows you to first configure your MFA account, and then when you have to authenticate, you can provide the information through that application. What the application does is it provides you the notification, and depending on how it's set up, you can also use it similar to the tokens such as RSA Secure ID token, where the app shows you the one-time passcode, and when you log into any of the applications protected by MFA, you can use that 6-digit passcode that's that's generated by the application every so often. Like I mentioned, the other options are instead of using the app, you can use the automated phone calls or the text message as an option, which provides you that one-time use code, and then you provide that during the login process. When a user is enabled for MFA, user has the ability to change certain things on their own without admin intervention, And for that, what you need is a user portal piece. So when I show you MFA install on the server, you would notice one of the pieces is the user portal. That allows you to extend the service to users where a user can log in. They can configure how they want their MFA to function. For an example, if administrator allows, user can change their process from being a mobile application. Instead, they can change it to a phone call, or they can change it to a text message if they like. Whatever is the convenient method for them, they can change it. And that only is possible if admin allows users to do so. But the user portal provides them that ability to change if they're allowed to. So let me take a pause here and quickly show you what that MFA portal looks like. Okay, and what you should see on the screen in a moment is the multi-factor authentication user login. This is the user portal. Sorry for the delay. I'm also setting up the mobile piece so you can see both at the same time. Yes, the black square, if you're seeing that, that's because I'm trying to set up the mobile device. Okay, great, thank you. So as I log in, the first thing you would notice here as I log in is the user portal itself is also protected by multi-factor. So at this point, what I would get is a request on my phone that says I have a request pending, and I could just approve that request. Once I click approve, I would be let in the portal. So let me show you the method change that I was talking about earlier. Right now I'm set to use the mobile app as my approval option. What I can do is instead I can switch it to phone call and save this option. I can only do it as a user if my administrator has configured it that way. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Here I set it to phone call. If I was to log out and log back in, you would hear my phone coming in.
Please press the pound key to finish your verification. Your sign-in was successfully verified. Goodbye.
And what you would have noticed is not only the prompt on my phone, but the portal was just waiting until I actually confirm it on the phone. And as soon as I confirmed it on the phone, you would have noticed the portal actually come in and allow me to log in and do whatever I'm allowed to do on the portal. All right, so if you have any questions there, obviously go ahead and type it in. I will address them later. Let me switch back to slides. Okay. And so that one was just showing you the MFA user portal. Now let's talk about which clients and what's supported. Any browser-based clients are supported. That's the easy one. As you noticed in the portal itself, it was browser-based. I logged in. You can also consider OWA and ACP as the browser-based clients in Exchange. All the browser-based clients are supported. If you have the non-browser-based clients, so think of ActiveSync, think of Outlook, Skype for Business client, those are the non-browser clients. And for them, if we talk about Outlook, Office 2013, Office 2016, they are able to support MFA as long as you're using the right version if it is Office 2013. That means Outlook 2013, you must have March 2015 update or later. If it is Office 2016, the required components are built in. And we'll also discuss what's required on the other side, if it's on-prem or if it's Office 365. And then the app passwords for things like ActiveSync, which may not have ability to integrate with ADAL. So with those components which actually support or allow you to support MFA, if they're not built in, with ActiveSync, which being the best example, if you have Android, you have so many different clients that you can use to connect. Android's built-in mail client. You can use Outlook from Microsoft. You can use many other third-party clients depending on your need and what you want out of your ActiveSync client. Everyone uses it differently. Everyone develops it differently, and depending on what they support, you may or may not be able to do things that one client can do, the other client may or may not. For those, you simply do the username and password, but instead of using your standard password, you have to generate a one-time, or the app password as it's called, and that password remains the same. You usually generate it for application. How do you use it with Office 365 Tenant if you have it? You have to join the public preview, sign up with Microsoft Connect. Once your tenant is enabled, now, Paul, I believe this changed recently, didn't it? All the Office 365 tenants are now capable of MFA without going through the sign-up process?
Yeah, they did recently make that change, which is a huge improvement in terms of making it simpler and smoother to get MFA turned on and be able to start using it.
Right. So the first two bullets are probably irrelevant at this point with the recent change, but the third one still applies. Once you're ready to turn on the MFA, what you have to do is, besides configuring your users, obviously, on the portal, you have to apply the registry setting so that Office knows it has to use the modern authentication. And once you enable that, it knows that it has to use the MFA. If you don't want to use the MFA, obviously remove the registry setting. So if you enable the registry setting, you tested everything that you wanted to, and you're satisfied with your testing but not ready to just turn it on for all the users. You're ready to go back to your old ways of doing things. Remove the registry setting, and then Office will start using the old ways of authenticating you with username and password. How does that process look? You have Office 365 Tenant, you have Azure Active Directory, and then if you're in a hybrid configuration, you may also have configured ADFS, which is the far left federated identity provider. ADFS allows you to use your username and password you may already have before you sign up in Office 365 to continue synchronizing your user base from your on-prem AD into cloud. So your Office has the ADAL piece built in. What you're going to do is user makes a request. Your Office 365 user account is enabled for MFA. The request goes over to ADAL. It makes the request. The authentication library then passes on the request to the appropriate directory and identity provider if involved. So what you would see at that point is the request go through your web browser components on the machine that the Office client is running on, leveraging that for the authentication. And once it goes past the authentication either through the AD in Azure or the ADFS if ADFS is involved, once that authentication token is passed back to your Office client, it sends the token onto Office 365, and Office 365 verifies that the token is valid. If it is, then user is logged in. So as you might have noticed, the authentication piece is offloaded to the identity provider, and because of that change, now you're able to do whatever you need to do for the multi-factor outside of Exchange or Skype for Business itself into these identity providers, and that's where all the magic happens. That's where you get the phone call, or that's where you use the generated code from the app to approve the login request, and once that happens, the token is passed back to Office 365 saying the the login is successful and you do the rest. What do you get with different type of clients and with Office 365? The with and without update, I think at this point doesn't apply anymore with that recent change we just mentioned. Before, you had to actually sign up for the preview. Now you don't. So the left column, the Office 365 with update, is most applicable at this point for almost all Office 365 tenants. Outlook on the web uses modern authentication. Office 2013 with the appropriate update, Office 2016, and so on. All of them are able to use modern authentication, and what that means is they're able to use the MFA once you enable it for the users in your tenant. The only caveat is ActiveSync that has to use the app passwords. Now, keep in mind, I mentioned the Outlook for Android or Outlook for iOS. They're the apps, and Microsoft has the modern auth built into those applications. So that's where you can leverage MFA if you like. ActiveSync, obviously, you can't. So if it becomes a requirement that you must use MFA for your mobile devices, then your choice might be limited to Outlook for Android or iOS, or if you have Windows phones, Outlook on Windows phones. That's one piece I'm not sure if it leverages MFA or not. Now, we started with talking about the on-premises Exchange and Skype for Business, but we have been talking mostly Office 365 to this point. So in this table, we are doing some comparison of what features and functionality you have available on-prem, right? So you have MFA for Office 365, and then you have the far right column showing you the functionality that is available in Azure MFA and AAD Premium. Some of these, now all of these are available across the board, so it's just a visual reference because the next slide shows you what's not available. So for the AAD Premium and Azure MFA, where you have to deploy the MFA server or you have to use the AAD Premium and enable the configuration for your domain, you're able to perform additional functionality such as IP whitelist, blacklist, fraud alerts, reporting, block and unblock, even one-time bypass that I showed you on one of the earlier slides. All of that is not available for MFA on Office 365, but if you're using AAD Premium, you're able to leverage that functionality. And that, when we go through the demo, some of that I'll show you. The reporting, again, this is going back to the previous table where it's available in AAD Premium. Reporting allows you to see the usage. You can use it as a summary or detail. The benefit there is you want to see how the MFA is being used in your organization. You might also want to see the failed attempts versus successful attempts. If you have the new users, you might want to see whether they have activated their MFA credentials yet or not. You're able to do that. Fraud alerts allows you to see any compromised accounts. Don't ask me how Microsoft does that, but obviously there are sites. Anytime a compromise occurs, many times you read in news that hackers have put the known passwords out on the web. It's then easy to use the strings, use the hashes, and then do some magic on the back end, obviously. So using that, there are certain end-user sites as well. One of them I use myself to monitor if my personal email addresses and passwords are hacked or not. They're very useful. But Microsoft provides you the fraud alerts on your accounts that are a part of the Azure AD. Yet another benefit to consider AAD Premium. Now, ADFS itself is a separate component. Where does the ADFS component fit into all of this? when you want to leverage MFA in your on-prem, whether it's Exchange or Skype for Business or other components like VPN and such that we discussed earlier, any of those, if you want to use them with MFA, your ADFS on-prem is what's going to become a required component. What happens is you will configure Exchange, you will configure Skype for Business to use passive authentication. When you configure them for passive authentication, you're specifying who your identity provider is, which is ADFS. And then as the request for login comes in from user, whether they're using OWA or whether they're using Skype for Business client, their requests are sent to ADFS. Now, ADFS by itself does not have MFA functionality built in. What you're going to do is install the MFA server on-prem. Then you're going to install the MFA component in ADFS. And part of that configuration tells ADFS where to send the request if the user is enabled for MFA. At that point, your request comes in, ADFS takes the request because Skype for Business or Exchange is configured to use passive auth. The authentication is then passed on to MFA. MFA does its thing by either calling your mobile or sending you a request to approve on your MFA application on your smartphone. And once you approve that login request as a user, that request comes back as authenticated. Exchange or Skype for Business or any other app is notified of the success or failure, and then it goes from there. So here in this example, it just shows you how the ADFS layout looks like. So you have ADFS at the bottom right. The ADFS servers are the internal domain join machines. They have connection with your Active Directory. Then you have the proxy layer up top. That is your web application proxy, also known as the ADFS proxies before it became web application proxy in 2012 R2. And then the request comes in from the users, depending on where the users are. If the users are internal, the request goes straight to ADFS. If the request is from external devices, whether mobile or remote users, laptops or desktops, that goes to web application proxy, and then the request is proxied onto the ADFS servers. So again, let me switch back to the servers and show you a couple of demos. But before I do that, the scenarios that we are going to go through is the first one. I will show you the login to ADFS itself, and then the configuration on ADFS server, how I have configured the required MFA component. And so in here, this one actually shows you the process of logging into Skype for Business. The slide shows you the user makes a request. If it's an external user, like in this case, the request goes to your ad servers then pass it on to your internal servers. And then because of the passive authentication, the request goes to ADFS environment. ADFS request goes on to MFA server. This is the integration we had to do. So ADFS knows there is an MFA component, and there is a requirement for the users to use it. Once the request goes to MFA server, now the communication becomes between MFA server and Azure. And this is why you don't need to have the infrastructure required to perform the phone calls and to do all the MFA magic that happens after the user types in their username and password and the request gets to your phone. That's all maintained by Microsoft in cloud. So the request goes to cloud, all the magic happens, you get the phone call, you accept the request or reject it. And at that point, the response comes back, ADFS is notified, in process, the user is notified, and user logs in if it was successful. And then the next demo, again, I'm just going over the workflow first, and then I'll actually show you the process. In this case, we are logging in OA. So the user goes to the OA logon page. They type in their username and password. The request then goes to MFA, and the MFA server process is the same. It goes to Azure. You get the phone call or the request on your app. And in the end, depending on if it was successful or not, you log into your portal. So let me switch over to our demo machine. At this point, what you should be able to see in a moment is an application that shows you my mobile. Okay, at this point you should be able to see my mobile, which shows you the Azure MFA app. It's showing you my passcode that changes every minute, every 30 seconds in fact. And what I'm going to do is log into the MFA portal, the user portal that we did earlier. And when I do, okay, as I log in, what you would notice on my mobile is a phone call coming in, because that's what we set our user account to do. And when I accept the phone call, Azure is requesting if I accept the phone call and is it a valid request or not.
I'm sorry.
And because I took a while, it actually shows me a timeout screen. So what does the timeout screen look like? Let me switch to our MFA login and show you that. Switching the screens is never as quick as I would like. Okay, and you should see the MFA login screen again. What I'm going to do is, again, ignore the phone call that's coming in. What this basically simulates is the conditions when you're not able to accept the phone calls or the text messages to approve your request. What happens then? We talked about the one-time bypass. To be able to do the one-time bypass, the assumption is you have access to internet, but you don't have access to your phone, your text, or ability to make phone calls. Most common is when you're flying. You have internet nowadays when you're flying, but you don't have the phone calls, ability to make phone calls. Now what you get is the timeout screen. You should see that now on your screens. And the timeout screen has the questions that the user has set with their own answers, the answers only they know. Unlike most common websites on internet, here you have to answer all the questions. All of the answers has to be right. And then you're able to do the one-time bypass. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay. And once I answer them, I'm able to configure one-time bypass. What that does is it allows me to not have to use my MFA process, whether it's phone call or text or the app. So at this point, I can do one-time bypass. It gives me 300 seconds to bypass the request. And I confirm that. What I'm going to do now is switch to the ADFS login screen. I'm signing in straight into the ADFS just to verify the login process. And instead of getting the phone call or request to approve my MFA, it should bypass that process completely only for this one time. Of course, you need blessings of demigods for that to happen. It seems it's requesting the multi-factor. There it is. So that's a good thing. Even if it said it's going to request the multi-factor authentication as soon as we clicked it, the bypass kicked in. It didn't actually place a phone call or ask for any approvals on my mobile, and I'm signed in directly. Now, if we look at ADFS server, the screen should switch for you, and you should see the ADFS console. The authentication policies, when you look at that, you have the primary authentication, which is very common. for most of the ADFS installations. What you would notice further down in that screen is multi-factor authentication. That becomes available when you install the multi-factor authentication connector. That installation then allows you, if I go to multi-factor authentication properties, is it allows you to configure who should be challenged with MFA. So here I have configured only my account, but you can add more accounts and enable them in the MFA console, which I show you in a few minutes. Once you configure these users, you can set their request for certain devices, whether they're registered or unregistered, or leave it to the default like I have, and then select the MFA authentication for them from extranet. So what I want is anytime a user logs in from outside my intranet, I want them to be challenged with MFA. And so I have extranet checked, I have Windows Azure MFA checked, and the installation piece that I had already done, I will show you what that looks like. Basically, you need a couple of files. When you enable MFA in Azure, you have to go to your Azure portal, go to Azure Active Directory, and enable your provider. Once you enable the provider, you get to download the MFA server setup. And then when you install the MFA server, you get these adapters. The adapter installer is what I have copied over to ADFS server along with the config files. Once you set up that adapter, ADFS shows you these pieces that you saw for the multi-factor authentication. So that's the ADFS side. Now ADFS knows how to talk to MFA, what is the server name, what is the username and password to connect to MFA server. So let me switch over to MFA server. Here's the MFA server console. When I downloaded the Azure MFA server bits from Azure and installed it, there was that one-time password that it provides from the Azure portal that I have to plug in. And then it connects to the right identity provider, because if you think about it, there are multiple tenants, each having their own domain that their users can authenticate to, right? So here, when I install it and configure it for the first time, it provides me with the unique password that connects only to the right tenant. Okay, so here what you would see is I have configured a couple of users who should be challenged with MFA. I would go to my own user. And when you look at user properties, I have defined a phone number, which is important because I want to either receive the phone call or text message or be able to use the MFA app from my mobile. So here's my mobile phone number. This could be, now here I'm logged in as an admin, so what I'm seeing is admin setting the user properties. User may or may not be able to change their own mobile phone numbers depending on the policies configured by administrator. I have the user set to receive a phone call. What I can do instead is I can set it to mobile app, and then I can either use standard or PIN. If it is standard, basically I get a request on my mobile that says MFA is requesting a logon. Do you approve this logon request or not? If you set it to PIN, the app will say you have a pending request. Please enter your PIN. And the PIN is set initially by the administrator, like the passwords. But as soon as user logs in the first time, they are asked to change the PIN to their own unique PIN that nobody else knows but themselves. So let's set it to mobile app standard here for my account. And then there are other properties that you can configure. Now, the next time I log in, what would happen is I would get a request on my mobile, and instead of a phone call, I would actually see the request coming in. Let me switch back to the client, and here I'm going to go to the Outlook web app. Okay, and you should see the Outlook web app login screen now. This one, what you would notice here is it's not the standard Outlook web app screen from Exchange. Instead, I'm using the pre-authentication from a load balancer, similar to what you would do in TMG if you had a TMG. You would configure TMG, have a pre-authentication. Now the benefit here, the way I'm doing it is I'm still using the same MFA, but instead of changing Exchange properties, I'm changing the properties on load balancer. So it's one way or the other. You're achieving the same behavior in the end. What I would do here is I would log on again as the same user. And before I log in, I'll switch back to the phone so you can see the behavior after we changed the requirements. This program switching is is proving challenging for me. Okay, perfect. So now you would see my phone, and as I log in OWA, what you would notice on the phone is a request come in. It is asking for approval of sign in. So instead of getting a phone call, now I'm getting the app asking me for approvals. That's how the behavior changes. You sometimes you may or may not be able to accept your phone calls coming in, maybe because you're in a conf call, maybe you're in a place where you don't have ability to take the calls, but you're able to use your app because you have internet connection. That's the benefit. And at that point, my app would show you, as I switch back to the OWA, you would basically get the standard OWA experience as expected. And so there it is. That's the login for OWA. Now, next I'm going to show you what the experience looks like for Skype for Business, and then we'll pass it on to Paul. Actually, give me just one quick moment to show you the Skype for Business here. Okay, and so here's my Skype for Business client. I click sign in for Skype for Business client, and what you would see is a login screen that is coming from ADFS. ADFS is configured to ask for the authentication information using forms-based auth from extranet. As I log in, because of the integration, it's going to show you the MFA piece. When I click continue, I'm going to get the request on my phone again, similar to what you saw earlier. And once I approve that, the ADFS component passes the information through. Skype for Business gets the information, and then it basically logs me in. So it will just take a moment, and you will see the client logs me in. That's the expected experience for Skype for Business. So at this point, Paul, I would like to pass it on to you so you can talk about Mailscape. And in the meantime, I would definitely like to start taking questions as well. I don't see many questions here just yet, but.
Yeah, by all means. So thank you for that, Bhargav. I actually learned several things from that, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. I wanted to talk just briefly about Mailscape 365, our flagship.
You might have to switch to the slides. Let me do that for you.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
You can take over as presenter.
Alrighty. I keep forgetting that we actually have slides, but we're going to wait for you to finish on-screen sharing first.
So here, yep, and you can go ahead and take it over. You can just take as presenter, and it should work for you.
Okay, right on. Let me just do that real quick. So you can see from this grid view that we have on screen, oops. Okay, good. You can see for the grid view we have on screen, you see a lot of green, you see a little red, you see a little yellow. For those of you that have been following along, I joined eNow about 3 months ago. And before I got here and started working with the product, anytime I would see this grid view, I would think, wow, why is it like that? It looks kind of 1970s. But there's actually a very specific reason behind it. And when I tell you what it is, I think some of you are going to agree that you can see the value in it. This grid view gives you a very quick, easy to digest, glanceable way to look at a screen and say, oh, okay, that's what's going on. You don't have to dig into the low-level details. You see this time and again when I go talk to customers that have SCOM or OpenView or Splunk or some other detail-oriented reporting product or monitoring product. It gives them very fine-grained information. It's like trying to see what's growing in your garden by looking through a microscope. You can get super, super, super detailed views of the cells of one rose. But if you want to see how many rose bushes you have or whether there are weeds growing over by the front door, you can't see that with a microscope. So what we do is we give you a broad-scale synoptic view of everything that's happening in your environment around Office 365 with the ability to very quickly jump down to a lower level and see what's happening. Now, another thing that we do that's both unique and super useful is that we don't just monitor by looking at the state of the services that Microsoft provides. We all know that one of the drawbacks to Office 365 is that because you don't control it, you can't just RDP into a server to see what's going on when something is misbehaving. Microsoft tries to address that by giving us a service health dashboard, which frankly is not a great experience. It has a lot of drawbacks the way that it's currently implemented. So we don't just monitor what Microsoft is telling you. We actually generate our own transactions against Office 365 in your specific tenant. So, for example, we do tests to verify that a user from your tenant is able to sign into Skype online and send instant messages. We verify that a user in your tenant is able to send and receive email. We verify a bunch of other things through doing the same kinds of transactions that an actual client would do. Plus, we let you do that from multiple locations. So if you have users in Austin and users in Boston, you can monitor at one central location what the actual experience for those users are in both locations. Finally, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about reporting because for most organizations, reporting is something you do because you have to. We're always, at every level of IT, being asked to justify what services we're providing in exchange for whatever we're spending. It doesn't matter whether your IT budget is $10 or $10 million. You're always going to have those questions. We're working with, for example, a very large pharmaceutical company. They do about 30 million messages a month. Their IT budget is ridiculous. I wish I had like 5% of it for my own IT operations. But even so, every month they're required to produce hard copy reports showing a bunch of different aspects of their messaging environment, their message volume, who their top users are, what they're doing to try to keep those costs under control in terms of resource usage, and we enable all that. So with all this said, if you're interested in learning more about Mailscape 365, I encourage you to go to our website, enowsoftware.com, and have a look. And if you have specific questions, you're more than welcome at any time to email me. My email address is paul.robishow@enowsoftware.com. And with that, Bhargav, I'm going to turn the mic back over to you and let you answer some questions.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And I wanted to add to what you were saying about Mailscape 365. As people use Office 365 more, I had this discussion at my user group when I was talking about monitoring in general, is that you, the organization, the tenant, is responsible for making sure you're able to get to Microsoft data centers. From their point on, if there is a problem, it's Microsoft's responsibility. But up until then, you have to monitor your own components, your WAN pipes, your connectivity, etc. If you have ADFS involved, you have to monitor that. And what you need to do is have a way to quickly troubleshoot that. So that's where I tried the Mailscape myself a while ago, and I was impressed at how easy it was to click on one of those orange or red icons, or even green icons for that matter, and see all the components that are in the process, making that icon yellow or red, instead of trying to troubleshoot that by looking at, okay, I have a problem on certain component, let me go into the event viewer and look at what could possibly be wrong. Right, so that's one thing that I liked about Mailscape, and I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you for that. I was going to demo it real quick after you said that, and then I discovered that for whatever reason, I've got our production Mailscape instance loaded in Edge, but for some reason the Skype client will not let me share Edge.
No.
That's one of the programs I can publish. So you'll have to take my word for it.
Yeah. No, but I have seen that in action, and I know, as an admin, if I had to go and find that needle in the haystack, I would hate my life at that point in time.
So one question I want to ask real quick that I think a lot of people have had and are continuing to have, is it really realistic in a large organization if I turn on MFA for email? Right, that's sort of the sweet spot. That's the workload that everybody uses. If I turn on multi-factor authentication for email, is that going to solve problems for me, or is that going to cause problems for me in terms of troubleshooting and support and which versions of the clients I can use?
So that's a very interesting question. When you look of MFA with the Azure MFA, the process is relatively very straightforward when you think about setting it up. Right, but when user logs in and for some reason they don't get that expected phone call, or when they don't get the application to pop up and say, hey, you have a pending request, that's where the trouble starts. And anything that all the moving parts inside Azure are guaranteed by Microsoft's SLA. So you can say, okay, well, I feel better that I wouldn't see as many problems as you would expect if you were maintaining it yourself. And believe it or not, when I maintained RSA Secure ID for a global pharma, the same company probably that you were talking about earlier, because I used to work for them, that maintaining it in-house, no matter how big the company is, it's a lot of training. It is a lot of understanding of that solution. And when it is offloaded, like using Azure MFA, you don't really see, and I personally have to see once going through all these different demos. I present this often enough now to know it back of my hand, is that I haven't seen the failure once, right? So the obvious caveat here is now you have that dependency on the process of whether being able to receive that phone call or being able to use that app. So you can use your phone just as a token, like I was showing you earlier in the user settings. You can switch it to have the app just show you the code, and you type it in. Now you don't have dependency on the cellular network or data networks. At that point, you can be completely offline from the phone's perspective and still be able to use it as a token. So it gives you multiple options, and as long as user is able to log in at least once, even in the worst case, if admin allows you to use the one-time bypass, it in most cases doesn't hold up the users from doing their job.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And Bhargav, thanks to you for taking the time to educate us.
Anytime. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone, for joining. Appreciate it.